Hello, hi everyone, welcome back to Woo Can Cook. My name is Wesley, and this is a show where we are slowly cooking our way through all of the food from my childhood. Today we're adding to our series on hack recipes from local Bay Area restaurants with a dim sum recipe from a spot here in Oakland Chinatown called Ming's Tasty. For the Oakland locals watching, Ming's is a relatively recent addition to the Chinatown food scene within the last couple of years, and yes, I do mean relatively since most of the restaurants in the neighborhood have been here for decades. More specifically, I'm taking my best shot at a steamed brown sugar cake called Lai Gao, or Malaysian Cake, which can be found on the dessert carts of most dim sum restaurants. Now, right off the bat, I want to preface this by saying that a traditional Lai Gao is made from a starter dough, or levain, which is often passed down through generations, not unlike a sourdough starter, and it's the sort of stuff that is a kind of closely guarded family secret for hundreds of years, so I'm fairly doubtful that I'm going to nail this one on the head, but I thought it would still be fun to take a shot at it. Since I don't have a Lai Gao starter, and I'm sure most folks watching won't either, I'm going to be experimenting with a combination of more approachable methods, including baking powder, baking soda, cornstarch, and the most interesting of the bunch, my own sourdough starter. We'll also be toying around with some vanilla pudding mix as a good substitute for custard powder, courtesy of the ever-knowledgeable Walks of Life blog as well. So, let's get into it. Okay, so I'm starting off with 3 eggs plus a 1/4 cup of neutral oil. Then I'm following this up with a full cup of dark brown sugar. I'm packing this tightly into my measuring cup for accuracy, but if you want to be super specific, and with bacon you always should be, go ahead and break out your scales and measure out 128 grams instead. I'm whisking this up until combined, then following it up with a teaspoon of vanilla extract, a pinch of kosher salt, and 1/3 cup of evaporated milk. Next up, I am going to break out my gram scale here for an optional 55 grams of sourdough starter, and yes, you absolutely do need a gram scale if you are using starter, because this stuff is filled with air pockets, so you'll never get an accurate reading with a measuring cup. This is also definitely optional since we are adding other leavening agents later on, but I think it adds a nice bit of chewiness and softness to the cake that you really miss out on without the traditional Lai Gao levain. I'm mixing this up until combined, and we're moving on to our dry ingredients. So, I'm adding a fine mesh strainer to the top of my bowl so that we can sieve out our dry ingredients and avoid any large clumps. Starting off, this is 1 cup of AP flour going into our sieve with a good shake, followed by a full tablespoon of cornstarch, and finally a tablespoon of custard powder, or in our case, vanilla pudding mix. Next up are our primary leavening agents, which are 2 teaspoons of baking powder and 1 teaspoon of baking soda. Now, I'm not a food scientist and most definitely not an expert baker either, but essentially the reason we are using both here is because baking powder is double acting, meaning that it has a second leavening reaction once during the mixing process and once during the baking process. This, combined with our baking soda and our acidic agents, in our case brown sugar, will give us the best possible shot at an impossibly fluffy steamed cake while also still quite chewy as well, the chewiness coming courtesy of our baking soda and our sourdough starter. Or at least so I've been told. If you really want to dive in further, I'll go ahead and link some resources in the description as well. Science. I'm mixing all of this up into a smooth batter, then covering it with plastic wrap and letting it proof for 30 minutes. Okay, so moving on, I'm keeping it pretty traditional here and breaking out my Chinese bamboo steaming basket. If you don't own one of these, a plain old 9-inch cake tin with a steaming basket at the bottom of your pot will also work too. I'm lining my basket with parchment paper here, then adding my batter and heading over to the stove. Over on the stove, I'm placing my steaming basket on top of a pot of boiling water on high heat. We want pretty aggressive heat here since the steam is already quite gentle. If you're using a cake tin, go ahead and place a steaming basket inside of the pot and place the cake tin right on top. For our bamboo steamer, I'm adding a clean dish towel in between the basket and its cover to catch any residual moisture that might build up. Then I'm letting this steam for a full 20 minutes and removing the towel. Remember to remove it because as the cake starts rising, it's going to start coming into contact with that towel and you're going to have a fun mess to clean up, like this. I'm letting this go for another 10 minutes until a toothpick inserted into the cake comes out clean and we're ready to eat. This is definitely one of my favorite Chinese desserts of all time, and was also one of the first things that I used to pick off of the dim sum carts when I was a kid. I have a lot of fun memories of eating this stuff with a tiny bit of soy sauce too, which you should definitely not do, because the cakes would sit on my plate for the whole meal and kind of absorb all of the juices and sauces from the rest of the meal. In all honesty, I was hoping this cake would get a little bit more rise. The cakes you've probably seen at restaurants like Ming's Tasty all have huge air pockets and sometimes rise up to 3 or 4 inches or more. If you do run into the same problem, I'm guessing the issue that I had with rising may have been related to the age of my baking powder, which was a little stale and can definitely cause issues with rising if it's too old. Otherwise though, this was definitely still super tasty with a nice bit of chew and tang from our sourdough starter. So if you found yourself an expert sourdough bread baker during the COVID-19 quarantine and have some sourdough starter on hand, I'd highly recommend this one. Okay, so that's it everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in and checking out this recipe. If you're an Oakland local like me, definitely drop by Ming's Tasty on 10th and Webster for some dim sum. I know they're doing some takeout during the shelter in place, so you can pick up some food to go. Otherwise, I hope you give this recipe a shot and let me know how it goes. If you haven't already, make sure you check out some of the other Bay Area restaurant hacks that we've been doing on the channel, including some stuff from Ni Cha Thai in Oakland, Dragon House in SF, and some more stuff coming up soon too. As always, like, comment, subscribe, push some buttons, and hopefully don't press the dislike button. Alright, I'll see you soon.